I've gotten more confident, more curious in exploring systems. And I would encourage anyone, for me, the biggest roadblock was just a mental one. And I don't think it was actually any inability to understand these systems. It was just me telling myself that it couldn't be done. So if you've got that mental roadblock, I encourage you to get over it, because that might be the only thing holding you back. Hey there, welcome to Book Overflow. This is the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I am Carter Morgan, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toops. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. It really helps the podcast grow. And we're so glad you're here listening, because today is a special episode. By the time you're listening to this, it is December. And to round out the year, like we say, Nathan and I are human. And as much as we love reading the books, it is quite a time commitment. And so to give ourselves a bit of a break, but to still provide some quality content to you guys, we're rounding out the year with some special episodes where we're not going to talk about any new books, but we're going to reflect on some of the books we've read. This episode is what we're calling our accountability episode. At the end of every episode, when we read either the whole book or part of a book, or whatever chunk we read that week, we always like to ask ourselves what we would do differently in our career as a result of having read the book. And we thought it'd be fun to go back over these past 6 months or so and follow up with each other and ask, did we actually do that? If we did, how did it go? Was it a success? Did we not do it? Why did we not do it? And so that's what we're going to spend this episode doing. Nathan, how do you think this is going to go? What are your thoughts on this episode?
I'm excited, and I think that this is a really nice part of seasonality that we learned out of slow productivity.
Absolutely.
I hope this episode works out well for the listeners as well as it does for us, because this would just be a fun thing to reflect on each year. Also, 15 books that we've read
Absolutely.
since. Yeah, I think it was the first recording or first episode was in the very end of May. I would, on my own, I would never would have read 15 books like this. So this is, I don't know. I was looking back and going, even if I didn't do half the things I said I would, I'm very proud of myself.
Absolutely. And as a meta reflection, I'll just put a selling point out there for the benefits of reading. And even as we go through, it's funny because you compiled this list, Nathan, of kind of all the things we said we'd do. I haven't reviewed it quite yet. So this is going to be more a surprise to me than it is to you. But just as I've been working, I've noticed just the general knowledge of the books seeping into my day-to-day life. I don't think there's been a single book we've read where I've been like, ugh, that was a waste of time. Like, I've gotten at least one real useful insight that's benefited my work out of every single book we've read. So
agreed.
Again, just a plug for being well read. It's worth it,
great.
I think.
And I will also say, I think a lot of folks who probably listen to this podcast, you probably have a backlog of books you're meaning to read, and you're probably maybe even beating yourself up a little bit on like, one day I'll get around to it. I will tell you, if you just take a few pages, even if it's very modest, 5 minutes a day, whatever, and you just start making forward progress, it adds up. And it's like, if you just replace a little bit of doom scrolling, a little bit of time that unintentional time on social media, and just like use it in a productive vein, it really adds up. It's one of those compounding interests that kind of creeps into your life.
Well, we're excited to get started. As always, feel free to message us on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod, or contact us at contact@bookoverflow.io with your thoughts on this episode. This is really your podcast as much as it is ours. And when we try new things, we always like to hear back from the audience. Did you like that? Do you want to see, would you like this to become a yearly or a biannual tradition? Our thought is, we probably weren't going to read a book this week, so that some content is better than no content. But hey, we want to hear from you, and we are excited. So we'll just get right into it. And first, we'll let you in on some podcast lore. We are not the first episode of the podcast is The Practice of Programming by Brian Kernighan and Rob Pike. But that is not the first episode we ever recorded. In fact, we recorded 2 episodes prior to that. Again, more podcast lore. Nathan and I met through the Georgia Tech OMSCS subreddit. I was looking
Yep.
for a co-host for the podcast, and I thought I need someone who's insane enough to commit to a really long, really hard self-study schedule. And I thought I know the perfect place, Georgia Tech OMSCS students. And so I put out an all call, and Nathan Toops responded, and it's just been great ever since then. But so the first book we kind of read together was The Philosophy of Software Design. I said, hey, it's at 200 pages. If you can finish this in a week, that's probably the pace we'll be going at. And it's a great book. So that was the first one we did. We followed it up with Refactoring. I think did you suggest Refactoring, Nathan? Or was I don't remember who did it.
I think it was on the backlog, and we just both were like, oh, cool, I've been meaning to read that. I think that's what it was.
Yeah. But then the first episode, the inaugural episode, that was your suggestion, The Practice of Programming.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And what a great suggestion, because that led to 2 fantastic interviews with Brian Kernighan. So let's talk about the practice of programming. We're not going to give a summary of kind of each book as we go through it. You can go listen to the episode, and you'll gather context about what it's about as we talk about our commitments. But if we give a summary of each book, we'd be here forever. So, Nathan, you said for the practice of programming, what you're going to do differently in your career, you said there is no substitute for a well-reasoned system, and style matters not just aesthetics, but as a pro-social way of being clear with your own thinking and for communicating with others.
I think I got better about declaring what I was going to do different, but I think these were notes to myself. I'm basically saying, make time to make sure that what you're building is a well-reasoned system. I've actually taken this one to heart. I'm doing a demo later today, actually probably a couple hours after we record this, on a system that I was hacking it together because I was just learning some stuff for a project at work. And I actually went back and took some of the things from Philosophy of Software Design and Practice of Programming, designed it twice, and making sure that I really thought through the aesthetics. I also put like full test coverage just because I wanted to make sure that this demo went really well. And I learned a lot along the way. And honestly, being deliberate on this part, on like really caring about coding style, really caring about like if somebody else used my library, would this be easy to hop into? But does the documentation make it like really simple to use as somebody who's like thinking about a lot of other problems that they're solving? And so proud of myself. I did this one. That's awesome. So I'll read yours. I like this idea. So Carter, you said it's not the biggest takeaway, but I'm going to be more deliberate about reading and understanding code before changing it and building or fixing it.
Yeah, I'm of 2 minds about this one. So I have gotten better about this. I do think I started a new job about like 8 months ago. And one of the mistakes I made in this new job was trying to tackle things from too high a level, trying to like find one problem space that no one was really working on and completely own it. But that's hard in a team as big as mine. And if I could do it all over again, and I've actually pivoted to doing this, I would have just gone in and grabbed like as many grunt work tickets as I could. Like, just UI improvements, little bugs, things like that. Because as you're doing that and as you're fixing things, you're developing a larger understanding of the system. But this has benefited me, just kind of trying to be a little more deliberate. Recently, we're trying to integrate Slack with our system. We just want to send out some automated Slack alerts if one of the resources you own on our system fails. And I think a previous me would have immediately kind of been like, okay, well, let me go find the Slack API. Let me figure out how to get that set up. How we're going to get a bot set up in our application. But instead, we actually, for our front end, we piggyback off of another application within the company. And I knew that they were using Slack somehow. And so the very first thing I said this time, I was like, well, how are they doing it? Right? There's got to be a way. And so I spent some time reading the code. And actually, I'll give a shout out to the IDE Cursor if you haven't used it. Cursor is like a fork of VS Code with AI built in. And it's really cool because you can, if you command enter when you're doing a prompt, it'll actually scan your whole code base and use it as an embedding. And so it kind of gives context about it. And so I've been using that to really kind of like help me explore large code bases. Yeah, it's super cool.
Oh, that's
But that was
cool.
one of the first things I did is I was like, wait a minute, how are these guys using Slack? And I looked into it and I realized like they weren't actually using the Slack API. My company actually has like an internal company-wide Slack bot set up with like, and then that's kind of like exposed via a secondary API. And so you're not interacting with the Slack API, you're interacting with that app's API. But what it does is that Slack bot is actually already set up in every single channel. And so you don't have to go through the hassle of standing up your own Slack bot and then getting permissions and things like that. And so that was really beneficial to me to be like, okay, don't just charge in and be like, oh yeah, Slack API. I know how to read documentation. I know how to get the Slack API up and running. But rather like, okay, what approach are we already taking? Can we duplicate that? And it was great. I got Slack up and running in our server in like 3 hours.
That's awesome.
So yeah, about two minds about that, but I think I followed up. Okay, so like we said, so that's the first episode. We skipped the next two because again, they were the first and second recorded. But then we get to what is ChatGPT doing and why does it work by Stephen Wolfram. Nathan, here's what I have written for you. You said, I've largely avoided getting into the details of neural nets, LLMs, and GPT, but I feel as though I should dedicate more time to the topic, if nothing else, so that I can speak more intelligently on some of the more nefarious claims. How'd you do with this?
I failed miserably. I've still avoided it. I mean, I feel when I read like armchair coach kind of articles about LLMs making claims, either doomsday claims or overly optimistic ones, I feel more educated, but I still don't know a ton of how they work. And it's aspirational, but no, I have not moved forward with this. So, Carter, it says, I want to be more curious about the tools I'm using. I use Get every day, and I have no idea why it works. How long would it take to read a paper on that?
Yeah, still have no idea how Git works. But I, but I do think I'm getting a little more curious about the tools I'm using. Reading Unix: A History and a Memoir actually made me much more curious about Unix and the Bash shell. And I've just gotten a little better at things like I've been working with one of the in local development, we set a lot of environment variables, right? And I want to make sure that they're set. I mean, in the past, I would just clear my terminal, do print env, and then do command F, right, for that environment variable. But I've just gotten a lot better at like doing a pipe and doing grep, piping the print env into grep.
Right.
That's not revolutionary, right? But I am just reading Unix history memoir. I was like, oh, like it's all that's the magic of pipes. Like it's all just standard out or standard in or standard air, and I can pipe that into a different command. And so
Yeah,
I'm mildly more curious, but no, I don't know why Git works.
Yeah, no, Git's interesting too. There's this whole rabbit hole that I ended up becoming obsessed with. Actually, one of the things I'm focused on at work is hermetic builds, or that's like a very in the weeds terminology that no one uses other than people who build things with like Bazel, but it's reproducible. You could think reproducible builds or eventually trying to get to deterministic builds. And you start really appreciating the architecture of something like Git because it is uses the whole like hashing content addressed mechanism with these Merkle trees and all these other crazy things. And it's like once you look at it and it feels overwhelming, but once you start diving into like, okay, there's all these like fundamental building blocks, and then this is why Git works. This is amazing. And then of course you look at it and go, well, Linus Torvalds did the same thing that Ken Thompson did and like built the fundamental parts of it in like a weekend, like a long vacation weekend. And but I think that gets into this idea of like curiosity and tinkering, and that's an aspirational thing we should all be jumping into.
Absolutely unfair that Linus Torvalds invented Linux and Git. That's insane.
Yeah. Well, I think it shows you the difference between a software engineer and like a software architect, in that architects have to have this vision for maybe a reality that doesn't exist yet, right? And really has to say like, if I really double down on this pattern, will it make my life better? And that's a hard thing to find that's valuable, right? I think a lot of us can build weekend hack projects that we'll never use again. Maybe, you're the only one who ever looks at the code. To do something that's so inspiring to a community is, I'm working in an open source thing now, and there's a few folks that are on the team, and it's amazing to watch their problem solving ability. Like I'm in awe of it. I'm gonna go, oh yeah, you really got to the crux of this. So this is a good segue to the next book.
Fundamentals of Software Architecture by Mark Richards and Neal Ford. And we should be giving shout outs to people who have appeared on the podcast. Brian Kernighan was on the podcast from Practice of Programming. John Ousterhout came on from Philosophy of Software Design, Martin Fowler from Refactoring, Stephen Wolfram from ChatGPT.
Wow, yeah.
And Mark Richards
batting
and Neal
right
Ford.
now.
Yeah. We're on fire. Both came on the podcast. Neal Ford twice, and we'll talk about his second book later. So big shout outs to all of these amazing, fantastic authors, really so generous with their time and with their insights. So Fundamentals of Software Architecture, that was a two-parter. Great book. These are all great books, but I just felt that I felt I needed to say about Fundamentals of Software Architecture. Part one, Nathan, you said, I love software architecture. I've run into a lot of these concepts before in the wild, but I've never seen them spelled out in such a clearly reasoned work. I'm going to spend more time exploring the various architectural patterns and work through some katas so that I can continue to grow in this area. How'd you do?
I share this. I actually have a job title of software architect now, so I really dove into that part. I haven't done formal katas, though. I have continued, like in my new job. It's like I actually work at a blockchain company, and so it's like drinking from a fire hose. And I'm 2 months in, and I'm still learning a ton, like having to wrap my head around stuff. And so while they're not katas, they are a lot of like toy implementations, so that I can kick the tires and understand how things are working. So yeah, I would say this is like medium success. I haven't done formal katas, but I've definitely doubled down on software architecture and in looking at these patterns.
I feel like if between you reading this book and now you became a software architect, that's got to count for something.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. And I was inspired. I was like, oh yeah, this is actually like a area of focus that would be really cool. Like I read this and I was like, I want to do this. This. Okay, and you said, I would like to introduce more architecture katas at work. We don't get to do too many greenfield projects, so it would be really nice to simulate one and keep those architectural muscles sharp.
I have failed at this, but I'm still trying to do it. And I say like trying because like how hard is it to set up a meeting? And like I just haven't found the right Slack channels to be like, hey, if you're interested in this, come to my meeting. But
yeah,
I really would like to do this. I think this would be a great way to make friends. I think it'd be a great way to mentor more junior engineers. I don't think this would be that hard. This is still a goal of mine, and I really should have done it in the past 6 months. Haven't gotten there quite yet. Well, then, and like we said, this was a two-parter. So Nathan, you said for the second part, you said the final 2/3 of this book had a fantastic mix of pragmatic and visionary. I plan to use some of the techniques in negotiations and collaboration outlined to help me accomplish my goals at work.
So I have used this, but I need to go back and look at some of the other techniques in there. Some of them I've remembered. But yeah, being a software architect is interesting in that you have to get comfortable writing a lot of throwaway code and like proposing patterns and doing that relatively quickly and being able to like really embed yourself with the software engineering team and figure out what kind of problems they're trying to solve. So like you're kind of like a group therapist. You're kind of like looking at the efforts that people are doing and trying to make sure that it's in alignment with maybe some bigger vision or goals, and then also looking for like gotchas, right? So it's kind of it's a very interesting role, but it's also squishy, like really squishy. And so I need to go back and like look at some of these techniques because if I hit a roadblock, sometimes it's easy just to move on and do something else that's also easy, instead of saying, oh, you know what, they don't understand why I'm like pushing on this one particular thing and it's going to bite us later, right? And is that like so yeah, anyway, I think yes, I'll say yes. I'm going to say yes on this one. Okay, Carter, more curiosity and confidence in exploring the software architecture of the systems I interact with.
I think I have gotten better at this. I struggled, I think, with the mental roadblock of this. I just left, I mean, not just left, earlier this year, I just wrapped up a couple years at a large cloud provider. And that was tough because not only was everything at this cloud provider kind of wrapped in like a layer or two of proprietary company technology, but the systems I was working on legitimately did push the boundaries of like my ability to reason about them. They were really big. They were really complicated. They played with a lot of like, if you're not working at like a cloud provider and you're like, let's say you've built your whole product on like AWS or something, at a certain point you get to like, and then this table is on DynamoDB, and everything in DynamoDB is like abstracted away from you, right? The problem is that if you work at the cloud provider, you actually do need to know how DynamoDB works to an extent, right? And like how it, or the equivalent at whatever provider you're at. And like it's tough. It's like some of the smartest people in the world develop these things, and to kind of come in and to know about it, it's hard. And at a certain point, I think I had kind of taught myself like, hey, some things are just too complicated. Just know how to work in your little corner, try to ship some stuff, be productive. And when I came into my new job, I think I kind of still carried that mental burden with me. And just wasn't curious enough about the system, because I think I kind of told myself like it's just going to be too complicated to understand. Recently, I've been assigned to some projects which have they're very like workhorsey projects. Like I've just had to pump out lots and lots of code. And as I've done that, I've been able to understand the larger system. And like, newsflash, it's not rocket science, right? Like it's a well-built system. But we're not doing anything that hasn't been done a million times before. And we're not doing anything, that was a surprise, like looking at after having read Fundamentals of Software Architecture. So yes, recently I have been curious and confident in exploring the system. And I've surprised myself at how quickly I've been able to gain an understanding of kind of like everything that it's doing. Like I have a great understanding of like the core of it, and then like gets a little fuzzy towards the edges, especially when it gets into like how are we transforming some of our core data and outputting it into certain data warehouses. I like some of those connector pieces I know about in theory, but not in practice. So all that to say, like, yes, I've gotten more confident, more curious in exploring systems. And I would encourage anyone, like for me, the biggest roadblock was just a mental one. And I don't think it was actually any inability to understand these systems. It was just me telling myself that it couldn't be done. So if you've got that mental roadblock, I encourage you to get over it, because that might be the only thing holding you back.
Well, and I'll say there's a through line here, right? There's two of these that you've said, expanding your curiosity, and then one of them on being more confident with like the architectural stuff. And so like that's interesting that you've had this through line of like giving yourself permission basically to get down into the weeds, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. I always say that in your life, tons and tons of people are going to say no to you. Don't be one of those people, right? Be the kind of person that says yes.
I struggle with this myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, sometimes it's really easy to look back and go, you know what? That was a self-limiting belief that like stopped me from doing something that I somewhere deep down in your heart, you knew you should do this, or maybe it felt a little crazy, or maybe it did these other things. And I'll tell you, a lot of those crazy ideas are a lot less crazy than you think. And if you can figure out, if you use like the like agile methodology or these like tight feedback loops, try to think about it like, what's the lowest risk way that you can try something new, right? And the idea being that if it doesn't work out, you maybe wasted a day, of your life or something doing something, but most likely it'll work out pretty well, and it might even be something that you can like introduce into your life. And I think it's worth doing. So speaking of, these are good segues. Clean Coder by Robert Martin. So this book is about
guest of the podcast.
Another guest of the podcast. Uncle Bob came on. That was fun. I was in Spain when we did this interview, which was really interesting. Gosh, I was like traveling a bunch early in these days. I'm doing a lot less traveling with this new job. This one's about professionalism. So this is not clean code. This is not specifically on, the controversial stuff like, never write a function that's more than 10 lines or whatever, all these other things. This is more how do we approach our professionalism. And Carter, I'll start with you first this time.
Yeah, let's do it.
You said, I've really got to give TDD a try. I think I'm going to do it with a pipeline rework this week.
Yeah, so I never did it with that pipeline rewrite, but I did give test-driven development a try. I had to refactor we had like a script that was being used for like SQL parsing, and then I had to transform that script into a cloud function, and then just also make it like a little more maintainable. Like it was all just like one big kind of Python thing that ChatGPT barfed onto a page, and so I was trying to like refactor it into different modules. And so I did. I did test-driven development. I don't mind test-driven development for a refactor. I think, and especially like, for example, if you were like doing a rewrite into like from, let's say you had written something in I don't know, like Python, but you need to rewrite it in Kotlin. I'm not sure why you do that, but let's say you had to do that. Like when the criteria is super clear, we already know what success looks like, and we're trying to basically replicate functionality. I think test-driven development is solid, because you already know what the goals are, and you can just start by writing the tests which outline the goals, and then making sure it passes from there to there. I still am not sold on test-driven development, especially in like a more greenfield
Right.
area. I think I'm partial to John Ousterhout's kind of design it twice philosophy, where your first pass on a problem isn't necessarily going to be your best one. I've been operating in kind of a design it twice philosophy, not in design, but in actual practice. I work in the growth organization at my company. And so we actually our philosophy is just like, hey, listen, but the amount of time we spend talking about doing something, we could just do it. And then if it doesn't work or people don't like it, like we'll just rip it out. Because like a lot of our products, like they're only used by like a couple hundred internal users. And so again, if you're at a big cloud provider and you develop a new feature, like even if only 1% of your customers use it, you can never get rid of it because that 1% depend on it. At our company, if 1% of our customers are using a feature, that means like 2 people at the company, and we can just reach out to them and be like, hey, we're going to deprecate this thing. Exactly. Right. I've said it before, I work on marketing technology. So I make tools that marketers use to more effectively target potential customers or current customers. So with that, with kind of like writing things, like that's something I've been doing more recently is just I'll write it and it'll be like kind of a bad implementation the first time, but it's just to get it out into the product and say, hey, let's give this a shot. Let's see how it works. And I'll usually put comments in the code and be like, hey, this is a naive implementation. If we explore this further, I'd like to do A, B, and C. And then as we kind of get into people's hands and they start using it, then I'll go back and kind of do like the second design and be like, okay, now let me do it there. And maybe that second design might be a better place to implement some TDD. But overall, still not entirely sold on TDD. I did find it useful for the rewrite. I also could have done the rewrite without doing it. I think the TDD was more of an intellectual exercise. So, yeah.
And were you this is actually I don't want to go too much to segue into the next one because I haven't finished my section here, but were you maybe writing tests that were what like Michael Feathers would have called characterization tests? Like you just made sure that the current implementation was fully test covered, and then when you started making changes, you would confident, or was it different than that?
I don't know exactly, right? I'd have to go back and look at those tests. But I mean, the first implementation didn't have any test coverage. I think I was just doing it kind of like piecemeal, right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, let's. You said with Clean Coder, you said the estimate section struck me to my core. I'm sloppy and hand wavy on estimates. I try to make up for this by breaking things up into small parts, but I want to try the systems outlined in the book. I also like the estimates part of this book. So how did this go, Nathan?
I never really was successful at this. I'm still a hot mess when it comes to estimates. In my new role, I've actually been given sort of carte blanche permission to not embed myself with outcomes yet, which is kind of disorienting. But they're just like, no, you need to like kick the tires, get used to the systems. You'll see, it'll kind of emerge what you're going to be working on. And I've got some projects that are coming out of it. They will have real estimates and timelines soon. So I haven't used this yet, but this is a good reminder that I should look at the framework before I start talking to product managers about when I think outcomes would happen. So this is a someday maybe. I'll put that there.
Yeah, our deadlines are not nearly as hard as like something a lot more customer facing, and so I've kind of with my estimates been a little like I'm 70% certain we'll get it done in 2 weeks and 99% certain we'll get it done in 3 weeks. But I think Uncle Bob would smack me upside the head if I were given estimates like that. So we move on to Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers, yet again, another guest of the podcast. Michael Feathers was fun because he was one of the first people we reached out to who had seen the podcast before coming on. I think I'd been like pinging him on Twitter, like tagging him in quotes or something like that. And so he came on ready. He had taken some friendly issues with some of the ways we'd characterize his stuff, and had come on the podcast ready to throw down. Not really. He was fantastic. We loved our interview with him.
Yeah. Also,
we have
this was the one that we had a content strike on, right?
That was so weird. YouTube, like, it was our interview with him. Like, YouTube content struck it and was like, and just claimed that the content we were using was like working effectively with legacy code. Like, that's all it said in all caps. I'm like, it's literally an interview with the author of the book.
It was some IP bot farm that we refuted it. It was funny though, because like we were like, what is happening? We didn't know if this was going to happen all the time. It was like a one-time thing. It still took a couple of weeks to go through the mediation process, but it came back on. But it was strange. It was a really weird experience.
Yeah, really weird. I think it was before we were monetized, so it wasn't a big deal. Everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast, and especially if you watch on YouTube. The podcast is now self-sustaining via YouTube ads. We make enough money to cover all of our softwares and some of the books. So that's a big deal for us. So we have Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. There's another two-parter. Nathan, in part one, you said, love the concept of characterization tests for legacy code. I'm going to steal this idea. I have a project I need to use this on. How'd that go?
Yeah, so that actually worked well. This is, to get into the weeds a little bit, characterization tests are putting test coverage on uncovered code, not for correctness, but to characterize the behavior, the current implementation's behavior, right? So you have some, function, method, classes, whatever, and you just need to make sure that you understand how it actually behaves, right? You need tests that cover the characterization of its behavior. And he argues that you need this before you can actually start refactoring it. And I didn't think about that, like being that strict. I thought, oh, wait, no, I can just start refactoring this and then I'll put test coverage on it. But you could break things, right? And so the whole point here is to say, maybe I outline all this stuff and then put comments in that say, hey, this, when I say 1 + 1 should equal 2, but it equals 3, and it's been equaling 3 for the last 8 years. And so maybe I need to go talk to the teams because they might rely on this number 3 output and figure out if I fix this, do I break other things? So we had a legacy code base. We were able to get one important part that we needed to work on fixed because we did characterization tests first. So I will say this is a success. And Carter, I'll let you kind of segue into this. It says, same on characterization tests. In the same vein, there's a lot of value in deeply understanding what your code's doing.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually used any characterization tests since this. But you've got to balance the deeply understanding what your code is doing with also, actually writing and producing and shipping code. But that is something, like I said, I've been on these projects that are just very workhorsey. But something I have gotten better at is understanding how we're doing things. Like my first thought when I enter a system and be like, okay, I need to add this feature or do this thing. My first thought is have we done that before anywhere else? Full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Cursor, and I've been working in Rust, and I don't know anything about Rust. I just started Rust a month ago. So ChatGPT generates most of my code, right? But I have gotten better. I don't just generate it with ChatGPT and throw it over the wall. I really understand what is ChatGPT doing here? And then also I make sure to double check and be have we done this similarly elsewhere in the code base? ChatGPT was handling the error this way, but I see from our code base, we actually have a standard error handling pattern. So I'm going to do it that way. So characterization tests, not so great on that specifically, but I have gotten pretty good at looking at a code base and not just saying I'm going to cowboy code my way through this, but I'm going to really try hard to conform to whatever conventions have already been set and make sure that my code matches them. And that's gone well. I mean, I've gotten a lot of great feedback on my PRs, and for the most part, they get approved with minimal suggestions, which is all you can hope for with a PR.
And bless you for going into Rust. It's a language that I appreciate exists, but it's not a way that I want to write code. So I don't.
I don't like it.
Yeah, I will say the folks that I know that are the types of problems that they're solving with Rust, I'm like, absolutely. Like this makes total sense. You need this, this borrow checker and all the other cool stuff that Rust gives you. But the way that you have to write the Rust code, I'm just like, I want to use other languages. So, obviously I'm a big Go fanboy. If you're watching it, you see, I have a big gopher on my wall. Um, I've also been dabbling a little bit with Zig, which is like a contrarian hot take, very small community language, but really kind of cool if you're looking at modern systems languages. And
I'm just such like, let's pick the biggest, most recognized language. Like, there's some things I do like about Rust. I think it's a small thing, but I like that Rust actually has all of its unit tests in the same file as its like actual code. Like, I think that's neat. In some ways, that makes it really easy. Like sometimes like unit testing in Java, like if you have like, I hate when you have like a private method that you have to make protected, even though it makes way more sense for it to be private, but you got to make it protected because you have to expose that variable to make the test work. Yeah. Rust makes that easier because everything's kind of in the same file.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Go does it similarly. It's still in the same namespace, so you can get access to private functions. But by convention, if you have like a foo.go file, you'll have a foo_test.go file, and so they're separate, but they're in the same package, and so they're logically close to each other. From like a connaissance standpoint. But Zig does the same thing though, where like the test suite's basically at the bottom of the file, and a lot of the cases where you have all your business logic and then a bunch of tests that you run in the same file.
I just don't like it's like everyone and their dog has written an SDK for Java or Python, right? And like it's frustrating to me that like when like we need to use an OpenAI client in our Rust our Rust server. OpenAI doesn't have one, so we're using like some open source OpenAI client. It's getting the job done, but it kind of bothers me that it's not backed by the company.
And it's also a potential supply chain vulnerability if you're talk to our security minded folks, or you end up having to write a bunch of like deserializers, and write your own structs and like be like, okay, well then you have to maintain your own JSON spec and a bunch of other.
Before I was doing a ton of Rust work, I had to. I was using like a Google Looker, which is like a kind of like a business intelligence visualization tool. Yep. And they have an API and they provide some SDKs for it. They have a Python SDK. They don't have a Rust SDK. And so I kind of looked at it and I didn't want to manage authentication on our own. And the Python SDK will just do it for you. So I kind of talked to the team, like, you guys okay if I set this up as like a Google Cloud function as like a Python, and then we'll reach out to Google Looker within the cloud function, and then our Rust server will just call the cloud function. Like, you're adding an intermediary step, but this isn't a super high throughput feature, and that way we can just kind of use the Google Looker SDK and that they build in Python. Like, yeah, totally. So like I do that, I set it all up, but again, I was kind of naive to Rust. I'm like, okay, so now I'll go into the Rust server and I'll just pull down the Google Cloud Rust SDK to call the cloud function. Surprise! Google Cloud doesn't make a Rust SDK. And so then I just scrapped my cloud function. I'm like, I'm not going to write my own Google Cloud function Rust SDK so I can call a cloud function to call the Python SDK, right? Like I'll just write a Google Looker SDK in Rust, right? And it was a very small feature, and so it's not. I got the job done. It's not the nicest looking thing in the world, but yeah. All that to say, you don't have that problem in Java.
And from the architecture book, right, everything's a trade-off, right? Like
Absolutely.
You have to always figure out, like, is it worth the effort for me to bring this code in-house, to do this? Is it going to be some scrappy thing I'm going to do one time? Or is this like the foundations for the future framework of something we're building? And all of those impact how you're designing it.
If I could go back to the beginning, I wasn't here when the decision was made to use Rust. I would have pushed back pretty hard and be like, we don't need Rust. But like now it's like you get kind of like that meta decision level, which is like, yeah, it's frustrating that like we don't have like any of these SDKs. You can't justify rewriting the server, right? And like Ruby or something like that to
And I will say the nice thing about Rust, if you are, willing to fight the compiler and do all the other stuff that comes with the territory, is that you do get a nice modern language that's performant by default, right?
Absolutely.
and that's cool. And the folks that, again, I have nothing but respect for the folks that have really dove into the Rust community, and yeah. But I also love a breadth of languages. This is the newest language I'm diving into is Julia, which is
Oh
me
yeah,
getting crazy. I'm holding up a book for those who aren't seeing this. Julia is like an analytics language. It's like high performance. Imagine if like Mathematica and R and Python had a baby. And so I'm doing a particular type of modeling called agent-based modeling. There just happens to be like a framework in Julia, and so it was like an excuse for me to kind of spend some spare time. And it's a good stretch. It's also it's the first language that's like indexed by one that I've really spent time with. So yeah. But that's like that's from that whole world.
My very
maybe
first
in Python, you maybe have heard. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying my very first personal project that I kind of did to like get my very first job at my school, writing Android code. I don't know why, but the index by 0 in Java like was throwing my head for a loop, and so like for my arrays, like I always left the first element empty, and so like the first, like the 0 was empty, and then that way that the actual first element was 1.
And then you'd have to deal with len -1 for the ending of the array.
I guess, right? Like, I don't know why, but it just
that's funny.
Back to me.
Well, speaking of trade-offs, yes. The next book is called Web Scalability for Startup Engineers.
This was a two-parter. We didn't do our second part with working effectively with legacy code.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
So you said, I want to try if morale is low, if morale is low game with a particular team with some legacy code. This seems like a pragmatic way to get started in transformational change. Now, the if morale is low game, what was that exactly? Do we remember?
I don't quite remember. I think that the if morale is low game was
it's like take the hardest piece and solve it.
Yes, it was basically on how to get some victories. I'm pretty sure that there was like several methods on this. Again, I could be missing something important. We tried this. I actually got organizational blowback, and I think if I had read the Unicorn Project first, I would have had techniques to address this. But I'm pretty sure this was a failure. I came in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited about it, and then I realized that I was up against a beast that I wasn't ready to fight against. I ended up leaving. A lot of times people say they don't. They leave a job because of management. And I think in this case, I was in a weird place where I was like cross-functional, and I had a manager that I reported to, and then I had like the head of this division of the company that I worked really closely with, and both of them would have different visions of what we should do, and they would fight up against each other, and then I would end up being in the middle of a turf war, which was incredibly dysfunctional, and something that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, where I would be able to talk to one group independently, and then I'd go back and who I direct reported to would be like, absolutely not, you can't do this, this isn't what your role is, and these kind of like weird pieces that I ended up, I don't know, I felt pretty defeated at the end of it. So
that's rough.
Maybe that'll be a conversation for another time. Yours for part 2. You have scratch refactoring and sketching out the code. Actually tried this at work this week for rewriting a data flow pipeline and was shocked at how much it helped me get started. Give me the context on that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it a ton past that, but I've done a little bit of scratch, if not refactoring, like drawing things out. You can kind of see my whiteboard's been more populated these days back there. But I'll kind of write down like a big list of like, what do I know about the system? I'll do that in my black marker. And then in red, I'll write, and what's kind of an outstanding question. That is by far, I think, probably my biggest challenge professionally is I'm bad at getting started at things. I'll just kind of psych myself out. And so I've been trying to find like low commitment ways to get started. And I think things like scratch refactoring and writing things out or drawing things out really do help. And so if I haven't done this exactly in practice, I have done it in spirit, or even just like that Slack integration I did yesterday, right? Like, not trying to eat the whole elephant at a time. It wasn't scratch refactoring, but I kind of, once I figured out, I was like, okay, wait a minute, we're just calling like an internal API. Before I set it up in the server, can I trigger it via curl? And I did it via curl. Right? And so like, it's funny, like our team Slack channel has like this, it did this progressive pings from the Slack bot that's just like testing with curl using our own credentials, testing within Rust using our own credentials, right? And so, again, I think that's like kind of in the spirit of starting out small, getting started, and then iterating from there. We move on from working effectively with legacy code to web scalability for startup engineers by Artur Edgemont. We haven't been able to get Artur on the podcast. I'd love to have him on the podcast. I really, really enjoyed this book. Another two-parter for us. Nathan, you said, I don't want to fall victim to the golden hammer or frozen caveman fallacy. I want to spend more time getting deep into various database technologies. The data layer is so fascinating and is always a set of trade-offs. I'm going to carve out some time each month for this. Namely, I'm looking deep into VTES, planet scale, also using the diagramming advice in the book. I like the framing. Kind of a lot there.
There's a bunch. I was very inspired from this. Yeah, so the golden hammer and frozen caveman fallacy. I'm pretty mid-career. I'm 41. It becomes very easy if you're not careful to just have your like bag of tricks and come in and just be like, ooh, I've seen this pattern. And sometimes it's really true. Like you do have some sage wisdom, and sometimes you are the frozen caveman. The frozen caveman is this idea that like you had some bad experience in the past, and then you just keep bringing it up. I think they talked about in other books that we've talked about, like What About Italy? Is kind of this frozen caveman pattern, where you come up with this like one edge case that really burned you one time, and then now you optimize for that every time you're doing anything. Golden hammer, of course, is, hey, you learned functional programming, so everything's a functional programming problem, right? That's not using the same tool to solve everything. Yes, I've been really mindful about this and making sure, especially with this new job, it's been really interesting because like we have both mature and very young programmers that are prolific, like really talented. And it's been really cool to listen and just see the way that they're problem solving, and not me just swoop in and be like, oh, you got to fix this. The other thing on spending time working on new technologies, I did spend a ton of time with Planet Scale. That was really rewarding. I'm not working on that stuff now, but it was really cool to see new technology stacks that I'd not worked with, like Next.js, Planet Scale, Clerk, which is this auth system. And then now I've gone all the way down the rabbit hole. I'm working with this permissionless blockchain proof of stake stuff that is like an entire rabbit hole of new technology in a whole other world of how you do these like trustless consensus things. And it's a lot to learn, and it's been really rewarding and fun. So I've actually stuck to this. I'm going to pat myself on the back. Carter, you said, I'm not familiar with exactly what our database strategy is at my company. I know we use Bigtable and BigQuery, but how are those different under the hood? A big part of the company thrives on MySQL. But what's the replication and sharding strategy here? I'd like to find out.
Not to brag, I crushed this.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, would I still love to know exactly like how Bigtable and BigQuery are working under the hood? Sure. But I have a very, very good understanding now of how we are using each one of them, why we made those different choices, how all three of them relate to each other. Yeah, I've gotten really, really good at this. And like, this is one reason I'm kind of like kicking myself, is like, it wasn't that hard to figure all this stuff out. Like, this was like, pick up a few tickets that kind of play around into these things. And then as you're doing that, make sure you're really reading team documentation and not just trying to get away with like as little work as possible. And then I even was able to take the time. It only took a couple of minutes. There were some misconceptions in our documentation, or sometimes we'd find a place in our documentation where like I couldn't quite make the connection. Like in particular, we kind of store everything immediately to a MySQL table, and then that eventually gets replicated to BigQuery. And that's mentioned in the documentations. Like the MySQL table and this BigQuery view are kept in asynchronous communication, but like the how that happens wasn't there. And so I took like 10 minutes to kind of reach out to some of our data scientists to be like, how exactly is that happening? I can't find it in our documentation. They explained it to me. I updated the documentation, right? So hopefully future engineers don't struggle with that. So yeah, I actually did a super good job with this. And it's I'm feeling good about this one.
That's awesome. So since you're riding high, I'm going to say, let's go into part 2 of this, which is, you said, I'd like to focus more on caching. I've never really had to implement a full caching strategy for a product, and I was unaware of the different nuances involved in each method. I want to recommend specific caching strategies, not just, we need caching.
I haven't been able to do this. Like, I just haven't had the need to like really get deep into specific caching strategies. I really enjoyed the section of the book talking about them. But I have been able to focus on caching more recently, in particular because I accidentally shipped a buggy feature that broke our search for like a couple hours because I hadn't realized when I was testing locally that I was testing against the caching layer. And so I had actually, I had, with our search, I'd written a feature that if you actually tried to search for anything, it would just like, it would error out and not return anything. But that wasn't happening for me locally because I was, prior to testing the feature, I had actually cached the result for that search. And so I was just testing the search. I'm like, hey, this is great. Like, I'm getting my results back. I didn't realize I was testing against the caching layer. So I actually did ship a development feature after talking with some of the other senior engineers on the team, where I was like, do we even really want to use caching when doing local development? It seems like 99% of the time you'd want to be testing against the local database. I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. And so I actually did ship a config flag for the feature that disables caching by default locally and then enables it in staging
That's super
and production.
wise. I did something very similar where one of our engineers kind of went all out and built this whole distributed system using Docker Compose to like perfectly imitate what they're doing. And I was like, that is useful, but we actually want to be able to turn this off so that we can poke at parts of the system, you know, and simulate always having an invalid cache and things like that.
Yeah, it took like half a day to write, if that. So Nathan, you said, again, I love the advice on personal and team scaling. This book made another solid call out to pair programming. I need to give this a try on my current team.
Well, I did this. We had a particularly juicy problem that one of our engineers kept having to like go back and he would like work on something, get blocked, work on something, get blocked, work on something, get blocked. And I realized, hey, I could unblock him if we just pair programmed. And we just sat there. I made a bunch of like executive decisions, you know, like team lead decisions as we were, he controlled the keyboard and I was like working through edge cases and test coverage and some other stuff. And as a team, we were able to knock this thing out in, I think like 2 hours.
Nice.
Which probably would have been 3 dev days of like going back and forth and getting permission. So it was really cool. I still don't do pair programming as much as I would like. But yeah, I found this book really valuable overall, and I think it did have it's had an overall like underlying influence on how I've approached certain things.
Shout out to the product Tuple if you haven't heard of it. My company pays for it for everyone. Do you use Tuple? Or have you?
No. I wrote it down though because you mentioned it in the last episode, and I was like, I want to give this a try. That sounds cool.
Tuple is really, really cool. I believe it might only be available for Mac right now. I'm not sure, but it's just really nice that like it's just really low latency pair programming and screen sharing. Like if you've ever been like Google Meet, like one of the things that's super frustrating is that like the screen is like really small. Tuple is just like, it lives up in kind of like your toolbar up top. You can like start a call with someone in like 10 seconds. And then it's just really nice to like when they share their screen, you know, you can make it like full size, right? And so I have it on my big old monitor. Like I love Tuple for pair programming. Really cuts down on the friction. Like you think you wouldn't need a dedicated tool for pair programming, and you get away with it with like Slack or a Zoom or things like that. But if you're really serious about programming, especially in a distributed team, I highly recommend Tuple. We should get in contact with the Tuple people. I'm advertising them for free, but I bet they'd sponsor the podcast.
Be cool.
Okay, moving on. Recoding America by Jennifer Polka. Nathan, you said this book goes well with working with legacy code and that it's a cultural approach to complex systems and organizations. I love the focus on introducing cross-functional teams to solve problems. We'll explore this for certain initiatives I'm trying to drive as well. Any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, this book, great book. It was recommended by Brian Kernighan. I wish we could get Jennifer Polka on our podcast, but I think we're just too small fish at this point. But yeah, this is a great book. I don't think that this. Yes, Jennifer, Jennifer, and your publicist, you can do this. But I think this is one of those like it helped me understand organizational dysfunction with real examples from probably the largest dysfunctional organization on the planet, which is the U.S. government. And it was a really interesting book. I don't think I had any particular takeaways other than it's a great book.
And
so Carter, you said, I continue not working at places like this book describes. Haha.
I nailed it. I still don't work at places like that Recoding America describes, and I hope to never work at them. So nice. Doing great there. Okay, now we move on to Building Evolutionary Architectures by Neal Ford, Rebecca Parsons, Pat Kwa, and Pramod Sadalage, all of whom have been guests on the podcast, except for Pat. We'd still love to get him on. Let's see. So another two-parter here. This is actually the book that broke the podcast because it was like 280 pages, and we're like, we can get this done in 1 week. And like we texted each other halfway through, like, we can't do this, man. And so we slowed down the pace a little bit.
Yeah, no, it was good.
It's a great book, but it's dense. It's very dense.
Yeah, super dense. And yeah, because that's when we realized we're like, okay, certain books have paces to them that like even if it's just page count, it's like density as well.
So part one, Nathan, you said, I want to expand and experiment with various fitness functions, their automation of my work.
Yes. This has been great. I've probably even sounded like a broken record to some folks ever since I learned the terminology of fitness function. I've been trying to like spread the word. Basically, a lot of people don't know how to communicate what types of testing or ways of saying that a part of a system functions the way we expect it to, and that CI/CD is just a subset of this. But there's other types of fitness functions. Once you have that terminology, it makes it much easier for folks to say, does the system behave as expected, right? Or are there ways that we can test failure points and things like this? It's been great. Actually, we have a lot of fitness functions at this current company, but I've also been looking at ways that we could shore up things. One of the reasons I'm doing agent-based modeling is that there's a whole class of things that I think that we can test fitness on. We do a lot of algorithmic based things like, changing the phi of something based on congestion versus like tapering off over time. And there are a lot of these mathematical equations, and we need better fitness functions for testing the emergent properties that could come out of that. And so, this is I stuck to it. I love any architecture book. I'm like a kid in a candy store. So this is great. Carter, you said, same here with fitness functions. I want to be more deliberate about them. And then you also said you want to look into automated service discovery.
Yep, haven't done either of these things.
Oh. Hey, someday maybe list. That's the old getting things done methodology. You're like, I know I need to do this, but someday maybe.
Okay, moving on to part two with building evolutionary architectures. Nathan, you said, don't fight Conway's Law spoke to me. I want to apply some of the culture and experiment changes proposed in the books. And I want to expand experiment with the various fitness functions and their automation of my work. So a little bit of a repeat here, but also Conway's Law. How'd you do with this?
So I'm still a huge fan of Conway's Law and don't fight Conway's Law. We actually, team topologies is going to come up early next year. We're really excited about it. I also failed at this. Again, this is where I ended up walking away from the company that I was working at. And this was the two-parter. One of them was the sort of the initiatives that we were working on and the fighting between leadership. The other one was that I tried to implement this and it just blew up. And so, I'm a success in that I tried it. I'm a failure in that I failed. So,
hey, that's something.
Yeah. And then you said you want to try to avoid resume-driven development. Oh, cool. And then hypothesis-driven development. So elaborate.
I don't remember what hypothesis-driven development is. I think I could guess what it is from what it's talked about. I think if it is what I think it is, I actually have gotten better at this, where it's like we've been implementing some AI features in our code base, and I've gotten pretty good at just being like, hey, let's just get it done kind of quick and easy, see if it works. And then if it does, we'll kind of build more on it. I actually think I'm doing a good job at avoiding resume-driven development. Like I said, I'm trying really hard to come into a code base and just do things the way things have been done, build features that are easy to understand, easy to read. So yeah, I don't think I've try to introduce any big new initiatives that we really don't need, just to bump up the resume. So doing good there. That takes us to Looks Good to Me by Adrian Berganza. Another two-parter. Part one, and we'll call out Adrian Berganza, a guest of the podcast. Part one, Nathan, you said, I want to spend more time on the automation suggestions like PR templates and code owners automation. Any luck there?
I did not do this. This is on my someday maybe list. I think this was all happening in all the volatility before I left the last company, and I was just like, I'm not doing any of this. So again, new company, we're open source project, and we actually have a lot of this, and it's pretty iterative. I've seen it shift over the last couple months. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to hop in and make some improvement. That'd be kind of cool. Okay, you said I want to be better at pair programming. My company talks the talk, but I am not walking the walk.
I have gotten better at this. Like I said, as I've been getting into Rust, I've been doing more pair programming. If not pair programming, almost kind of like pair PR reviews. Like I'll often write a feature, especially if it's like a big one, give it my first pass in Rust, and then I'll book some time with even a more junior engineer who's just we have some who are more junior, but they've been working in Rust for longer, and we'll kind of just go through the changes I've made like line by line, and I'll just and I'll kind of start up like, I know this works, I've tested this end to end, this gets the job done, but is this Rust idiomatic? And then we'll go through it line by line, and he'll suggest changes for me. So I've gotten better at that. Again, maybe not like true pair programming, but it is collaboration amongst engineers while talking about programming. So that's something. For part 2, Nathan, you said, I hadn't taken a serious look at AI assisted code reviews and PR tools, and I want to investigate these some more. Any thoughts?
I never did. I have a list of things I want to look at in the future. It looks really cool, and I actually think this is like one of those promising areas in which AI assistants would be really powerful, because a lot of the prompt context is just embedded in the PR review process. But I haven't seen it, and I've never seen it in the wild. That
Check
would be
out Graphite.
cool.
I think she mentions Graphite in the book. We have that on our repos, and like it's neat. Like Graphite often catches a lot of things that, like, the suggestions it makes are always good. I've only had like 1 or 2 suggestions where I've had to comment on it and be like, you told me to do this, but I tried it and that was no good. But like a lot of times it even just finds typos. So I like Graphite.
I have used Sonar Cloud and Sonar Cube, which is, I guess, like the previous generation. It's not large language model based, but it does have a bunch of AI sort of like, code smell and linting type stuff that's in it that has been useful. But I would love to see this next generation. That sounds cool. Your part 2 says, I'm still thinking about pair programming and mob programming. Oh yeah, mob programming. Yeah. My new team is just 3 engineers, so mobbing might be a good fit for us. And then, okay, yeah, that was it. So
this again, I still am thinking about pair programming, but it's actually funny. I actually got moved off of that team temporarily back to my old team, which is a lot more engineers. They just had some projects they really needed to. They just needed some extra muscle on some projects, and I was happy to help out. So no, I haven't done any mob programming, but like I said, I think I've gotten better at pair programming, and I'm directionally correct there. Heading the right way. That takes us to Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. Another great book, and one that I think we really benefited. We could have read this in 1 week, but I really enjoyed reading it over 2, and I thought that fit the ethos of the book. Cal Newport has not been on the podcast. He's another pretty big name, and we actually did hear back from him. But Cal Newport is obviously he guards his time and preciously, and they said maybe when he writes his next book. So we're watching like a hawk. Nathan, you said, it's so easy for me to let doing too much creep in. I'm committing to doing fewer things and focusing on 2 or 3 missions that are in alignment with my larger goals, and limit the projects I take on as well. Yeah,
I've been a success here.
There we go.
It's been hard to say no for some things, because I'm like, I love collaborating and working on stuff, but it can risk the success of the most important things that you're working on. And so, yeah, this has been good. For you said putting tasks on autopilot. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done, but this will help me not use the small tasks as pseudo productivity.
Yeah, I think in a larger sense, I've been really successful with this. That like the idea of pseudo productivity really hit me when reading this book, and I realized like, oh crap, there is a lot of stuff I'm doing that is like productive, but isn't actually delivering any value. And so I focus a lot more on like, okay, what actually delivers value. And I have gotten better at like my day-to-day. Like there are some things like just the first thing I do every single morning is I follow up on yesterday's pull requests, right? Like especially we're a distributed team across the globe. And so there's often comments left from from engineers like in Europe. So like that's really nice. Like I just know that's the first thing I do every day. And also for someone like me who sometimes has trouble getting started, it's good to have a pattern. I just know that's the first thing I'm going to do every day. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to look at the pull requests I put in yesterday, and I'm going to review them. So I have gotten better about putting those tasks on autopilot.
That's awesome.
For part 2, Nathan, you said, I've already made this change on my newsletter, functionally imperative, applying both working at a natural pace and obsess over quality. By removing the weekly cadence on it, I'm going to take my time to explore the ideas more deeply. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I haven't published in a while after taking a step back, but I actually I've got a notebook of deeper ideas that I've been working through, and I have several posts that are queued up. This has been interesting. I'm glad I did this. It has taken a little bit of pressure off of the missions. I will say, though, that I know from an accountability standpoint that I will perpetually put this off unless I actually give myself some deadlines. And so I think I might have pendulum swung too far the other direction, but we'll see. I am about to have a long weekend with Thanksgiving, and then we also get 2 weeks off for Christmas, and I have a feeling that functionally imperative is going to be a big part of that. So you said, I want to obsess over quality more. Not exactly sure what that will look like yet, but it really resonated with me.
Yeah, I think I'm doing a better job with this. I mean, not in like I haven't written like any magnum opus or anything like that, but just as I've been working on the features I'm delivering, like I'm a big fan of the idea that like the first person who reviews your pull request should be yourself. And that's something I do. I'll put it in, create a draft PR, and just kind of take a look at it and say, like, is this really the best it could be? You have to balance that between actually shipping. But I think I'm doing a good job of making sure the stuff I'm shipping is quality. And I think I'm setting a good standard for the engineers on my team. So yeah, I'm not going to say that I'm, the Mozart of coding, but I think I'm doing an okay job here.
That's awesome.
That takes us to the Unicorn Project by Gene Kim, another hopeful get for the podcast, but we'll see. This was our first 3-parter. So we got a part 1 here. Nathan, you said you're still trying to figure out exactly what you'd do differently. You said if I were to stick around a larger org, I'd start a rebellion. If I'd read this before I left my last gig, I'd have given this a more vital try. Maybe I'll try to sanity check the 5 ideals on my next gig.
Yeah, this is all true. I mean, I felt a little disoriented because I was still like a little, fresh from a bad taste in my mouth. But I actually stuck with my ideals here in that the company that I'm working at is itself the rebellion. So this has been pretty fun, and so far very rewarding. You have there's value in forming a like-minded group that cuts across different teams, even if the purpose isn't to overthrow the existing order. Did you ever do anything with that?
I've gotten better at making friends across different teams, and I actually set up like a formal mentoring relationship with a senior staff engineer.
Awesome.
We had some similar thoughts on how we were doing interviews, and I had asked him like, hey, do you mind if like I just shadow you on a few interviews to see how you're doing them? And then afterwards we got along well. I'm just like, if it's not too weird, like could we just meet like every other week? Like I think it'd be really cool to have someone to kind of like bounce ideas off of and have a formal mentor. And so he agreed. We've had to cancel the meetings lately because just have been so busy with other projects. But we're still in touch. And so that's not a group. It is a pair of people, but I've made some progress in this area. Part 2, Nathan, you just wrote relentless optimism. How are you feeling?
This has been really good since leaving, and so I guess it's always easier to be a little more optimistic with the new stuff. But I taking this approach of like my attitude really matters and what I bring to the table, especially if some other folks have like sort of fatalism or other things there. This is a really nice thing to bring to the table. I think this has been a success so far.
I'm a big fan of optimism. I think pessimism is very much in vogue, and you can never go wrong by being a little optimistic.
Okay, so let's see. This is part 2. You said when you arrive on a new team, just get as many tickets done as you can.
Yes, I have gotten much better at this. And this is good advice for anyone. I joined this company and got the promotion to staff engineer. That's an inflated title, which I realized, I think, a few months in. I'm much closer to what you'd call a senior engineer at like a typical like a thing company. And I think I was trying to tackle problems from too high a level. Like I said, I was trying to find a thing I could just kind of own entirely and come up with some grand vision. It doesn't work. You need to have context about the system, and and part of the way you can make a great impression is just get as many tickets done as you can. And so I actually kind of had like the chance to make like a second first impression when I got called back to my old team because they just needed someone to kind of really help grease the wheels on a project. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do what I would have done all over again, and just kind of crank out as many tickets as I can. And one, it's just more fun to operate that way. And as I've been doing that, I've been able to gain a larger context about the system. And I've actually been able to propose some of those kind of initiatives I really wanted to do in theory of like, here's something that like a big new thing that would really make a big difference I could own from start to finish. But I've just been able to discover that by working in the project and being like, wait a minute, why are we doing it that way? Or this is a frustrating way that we have to do this thing today. So, it wouldn't be too hard to change it. So yeah, big fan of this. Be like Maxine in the Unicorn Project. Just get as many tickets done as you can. Be a workhorse. And then our final part with part 3, he said, I'll be applying the zones and horizons pattern to my current work. Also, I need to reread Jeffrey Moore's books, Zone to Win and Crossing the Chasm. And you put wink, wink, because we will probably read those on the podcast. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about exactly what the zones and horizons are and give a summary of that. But like we said, we'll be here all day if we do that.
We'll skip over it. The idea is that you need to be in alignment with the sort of needs of the business. And you need to also identify whether you're in sort of the loon shot early phase piece of a business. And so therefore you take bigger risks, or you're in a mature part of the business and you can take fewer risks. There's like, we go into this in depth in the actual episode. And this is actually something that I need to do currently. We have a few important initiatives that me as an architect, I need to actually be in alignment with our zones with these pieces. And so this is a good reminder that I should actually go back and take a deeper look, but I have not done it yet. Carter, your final piece was, I want to be more invested in creating new ideas at work, not just keeping existing stuff alive.
I've been doing a pretty good job at this.
That's
I think part of that is I excuse me, was a little misinformed about my exact role at the company. I went from a large cloud provider to a large e-commerce provider. And so I kind of thought like, okay, these are probably fairly similar in how you operate, but I just hadn't quite put 2 and 2 together that I went from maintaining a product that was generating $1 billion in revenue a year to being in a growth organization, which is actually designed to be taking like a lot more like moonshot strategies. It's almost like in Unicorn Project that final team Maxine leads up to be like developing new ideas. It's not quite like that. So I hadn't quite put together how I should be operating this new company, but I have recently, and it's actually been super liberating and a lot of fun because again, at the cloud provider, like a lot of value was put on like, let's talk and talk and talk and talk until we are certain that the thing we want to build is the right thing to build. Because the moment we build this and release it into the wild, again, if even only 1% of our customers use it, it's a huge amount of people. We can never get rid of it. We have to always support it. So let's be certain that that's what we want to do. And so I think that's a really good mindset for a big product like that. Unfortunately, I think I'd convinced myself that like it was the true engineering mindset, but context differs. And at my particular role right now, we can deprecate features if we want. We can pivot. We can change the whole product if we want.
You can do the move fast and break stuff.
Absolutely. Honestly, like the product I work on is like, if the whole thing were down for like 3 straight days, that would be bad, right? That would be like the CEO would find out bad and there would be recriminations. We would live. We'd be fine, right? When I was at the cloud provider, if the product was down for 15 minutes in one region, that was a huge freaking deal and represented lots and lots and lots of lost revenue.
Yeah, millions of dollars, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just have to, it's 2 very different ways of thinking. I finally kind of straightened out the differences between those 2 methodologies. So I think I'm doing that. I've created a lot of new features and I'm feeling good.
Awesome.
Feeling
That's
not
great.
just keeping stuff alive. I'm keeping me alive.
Okay, we're wrapping up the last 2 books. Last 2 books that we've touched on this year. Both of them were really cool. One is Unix: A History and a Memoir with Brian Kernighan. Of course, we had him back on for this.
Absolutely. So Nathan, you said you wanted to get even pickier about hiring the right people. Bell Labs kept their standards very, very high, and because of that, they were able to do amazing things.
Yeah, so right after this, I'm actually doing an interview. We've been interviewing some folks, and this has been top of mind. We already have a really strong engineering culture here, and we've really picked folks that would fit well within this sort of like Brave New World That's not true. We're not Brave New World. Brave New World's a dystopian thing. We're in this new world of thinking about the types of problems that we're solving, and so there's a unique type of engineer that we need. And so being picky on hiring the right people is something that's been really important to me. So I'm practicing this one. That's good.
Very nice.
You said get better at command line. Are you getting better at command line?
I am getting better at the command line. Not crazy. Not doing anything fancy quite yet, but I am, like I said, using grep a little more, and I'm also just appreciating the command line as a very cool tool in its own right? Not just a means to an end. So my appreciation for the command line has grown, and I think I'm getting a little better at it. So
that's awesome.
We'll see. We'll keep following up on this one, and that rounds out with our last book. And we're just going to do the books this episode. We did read the Agile Manifesto and the 12-Factor app, but just for the time, we're just staying with the books this time. We've got Tidy First by Kent Beck. Nathan, you said, thinking my work in terms of investments, the section on $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow really hit me. Sorting out, tidying things up in the terms of investments is a cool way to think about things, when and when not to do them.
Yep. I did this exactly so I'm doing a demo in a couple hours, actually a little over an hour from now. And I used tidying up relentlessly while I was doing it. Again, partially because I just wanted street cred with this new team, and partially because it was like, oh yeah, I should just do this right now. And then and it was great because I ended up building out this composable system with several packages and a few other things that I was really happy that I tidied up.
Nice.
Originally, it was like one big project, and then I was like, oh no, this is generally useful by itself. And at first I was worried that I was over engineering, and then I was like, you know what? I'll just strip down these interfaces. I'll make them deep, using some Ousterhout methodology, put some good test coverage, making sure that the things behaved like the way I wanted to. And I was like, yeah, I'm really proud of this. I can't wait to do this demo. This will be cool. So yes, thank you, Kent Beck, and your Tidy First methodology.
Absolutely.
You said, I want to try to include more optionality in my work.
You know what? I have done a good job with this. Like I said, I've been working on getting Slack integrated into our server. And just the way I kind of approached it, ultimately, we actually need the Slack client to do something. But I thought, you know what? For my first PR, let me just build the Slack client. And it's not even going to do anything quite yet. But I'm just going to build it. And it's going to have one method that'll just send a message to a channel, right? And then I'm going to get approval on that PR from the team. And then I'll kind of figure out what to do with it. And I like that approach because I'm kind of like, okay, let me get buy-in from everyone that just the groundwork is good here. And then now I've kind of got that optionality, right? Like, well, how exactly are we going to use it? I'm not sure quite yet, but I've already gotten buy-in on the foundation. And so I feel like I've got some options to explore on exactly what we're going to do with it first.
That's cool.
So yeah, I think I did a good job. So I guess, yeah, that takes us through all the books that we read. Again, 2 essays, which we didn't get to. Maybe we'll throw those in on the back half of the next time we do this. But I don't know, Nathan. I mean, let's just give ourselves some grades, or if not grades, then at least summarize. I mean, how do you think we've done with our accountability? We did better than I thought.
Me too. I feel like I'm either like a high B or a low A when it came to something like that. I think I'm not surprised on the things that I didn't actually accomplish, because sometimes it's easy to be aspirational and be like, oh, I'm going to spend time doing this thing. And you're like, I'm not going to do that actually. But I will say net positive. Honestly, I'm so happy that I saw that random post on the subreddit on OMSCS. This has been really fulfilling. And these are a bunch of books that I had on my bucket list, and probably about half of them I had on my bucket list. The other half have been pleasant surprises. And the part that I could never have guessed was speaking to the authors.
Absolutely. So many authors.
Mind-boggling. I remember us having the idea of oh yeah, we should reach out to the author. And I'm thinking yeah, sure. Anything's going to come out of that. And I was absolutely wrong. It's the best form of being wrong ever. So, yeah.
It's been really, really cool. That was always my goal, was to get the authors on, but I thought we'd have to be a little bigger. We're very pleased at the size we are right now. I mean, I think across all platforms, we're sitting around 10,000 listeners, which is amazing. Just really, really great. But I thought we'd have to be 100,000 or 1 million or something like that before the authors would come on. Nope, total surprise. Brian Kernighan agreed when we had 200 subscribers on YouTube. So yeah, the authors have been so generous with their time. I'm proud of us here. Again, like there's some things where we kind of laugh and be like, yep, we didn't try that at all. But for the most part, I think we gave everything a good faith effort here. And there's some things kind of like including more optionality in my work. Like I don't think when I built that Slack client the other day that like I was like, oh, I'm going to include more optionality because I learned that from Kent Beck. But it is it's nice. I don't know if I'm absorbing this through osmosis, or at the very least, I'm able to kind of look at the work I've done and connect it with patterns in the book and be like, oh, yeah, maybe I didn't mean to do it that way, but because I did it that way, I can see that I've kind of generated some extra benefits because of these principles the authors laid out. So
yeah.
I'd agree. I'd give us a high B or low A. Listeners, let us know if you disagree. But I think we did okay here. And also, listeners, again, let us know. I mean, I think we're kind of thinking maybe do this like biannually, like maybe every 6 months, because if we try to do a whole year, this episode's going to become 3 hours
30
long.
books would be crazy. I mean,
exactly.
That would be, yeah.
So let us know if you liked this episode. We had fun recording it. But if you guys like this, we'd love to hear from you. And again, you can find us at contact@bookoverflow.io. You can find me at Twitter at Carter Morgan. You can find the podcast at Twitter or on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod. You can find Nathan and Functionally Imperative work at www.functionallyimperative.com. And thank you so much for listening. Again, a bit of a different episode. We'd love to get your feedback on it. So let us know. And again, if that's positive feedback, we like it. If it's negative feedback, we also like to hear that. I just want to get an idea of how we can give you guys the best content because that was one of the big reasons we started this podcast. We really felt like there was a gap in substantive software engineering discussion, regular substantive software engineering discussion in the podcast market. So we hope that we continue to provide that this episode, even if we didn't actually discuss a new book. But let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you around, folks. Stay tuned for the next 2 weeks. We've got a couple more fun episodes for you. Not discussing new books, but reflecting on old books and just doing some fun stuff. We're excited about it. But your feedback is critical, so get in contact with us. Other than that, we'll see you around, folks.
See ya.